It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I want to start with you. I think we all are old enough to remember the Watergate hearings and the impact of that. The House is now going to be broadcasting their special committee. There's a lot of expectation that this will be a tipping point in American politics. Do you think that's overplayed?
It is really hard to know, having not seen this play out as you describe it. I think that they're stepping into this in a very careful way. They're clearly doing it in a way to attract maximum public attention to the opening of this series of hearings. I think experience would suggest that it's not as much the opening of this drama that counts, it's how it concludes, and whether at the end you're left with the sense that crimes were committed and indictments are going to be brought. But to be sure, it's going to have some impact. It will probably reinforce for sure the views of the people who are quite certain that Donald Trump and his collaborators have done something wrong, and for those that are totally opposed to that notion, it probably won't have much impact. The people in the middle, as always, are the ones we should be most interested in. I guess I'm also left with this sense that Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy made a really fatal mistake in not putting anybody on this committee that had doubts about, let's say, the conspiracy that's going to be described, because there's no friend in court. There's no one on this committee that has any other conclusion than serious crimes were committed, at least as far as the preliminary talks go. It's set up to be high theater. Again, it's far more important how it ends than how it begins, but I'm looking forward, and we'll be tuned in tonight to see how this gets started.
You know, Al, the one thing that we did have in the Watergate hearings were eventually there was a smoking gun that came out. I don't see a smoking gun here so far. Maybe there is some hope on your part that there will be, but what's your take on this chapter in American politics?
Well, first of all, I lived through Watergate. I worked for Ed Muskie, and as we've seen in all of the new reiterations of the Watergate scandal, and including the CNN wonderful documentary, which started last Sunday night, will be on again this Sunday, derailing Muskie's nomination and getting George McGovern nominated was a key part of Watergate. It was more than just the break-in and the cover-up. So I have a particular sensitivity to issues like this. Look, I think the committee has a very, very tough job. You know, we live in a country that's very cynical about politics. The electorate's divided. As Craig said, there's some people in the middle, but probably not. Most people have made up their minds, and a lot of these on what happened on January 6th, and whether it's a threat to the democracy or not, and a lot of those views are set in concrete. And the committee, in part because of the news media and the 24-hour cable, has set really high expectations. They've promised new information. Maybe some of the new information will be a smoking gun. We don't really know. I think we need to think about this as a trial. And what we're going to hear tonight are the opening statements. And what the committee is going to try to do is to tell a story, to provide the overview, and then hopefully in follow-up hearings next week and after that, they'll be able to lay out the evidence and come, as Craig says, at the end, so voters can come to a conclusion of whether they've made a difference or not. Now, I've run hundreds of congressional hearings, and they have a tough job because it's hard to tell a story in a congressional hearing. They're going to try different means. They're going to use video and other things, probably snippets of hearing of testimony of people like Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. And maybe that'll make it more interesting and easier to sell. But the other thing to think about, Watergate took a long time to take hold. After the Watergate break-in and a lot of the stories in the Post and other places, Walter Cronkite, Nixon won 49 states in the election. And it wasn't really until what you talked about, the smoking guns, which was the testimony of Alexander Butterfield, who revealed the tapes, and then John Dean's testimony as an insider, but the tapes themselves, that the story took hold. But there's another factor too, and this is really important. What brought Watergate to the conclusion it came to was when the Republicans turned on Nixon. And when it was clear that Nixon would not have any Republican support or enough Republican support to avoid being convicted in the Senate, Senator Goldwater and others who delivered that message. So far we haven't seen that, but that makes me think that maybe an important part of what happens tonight is not even as much what happens to lay out Trump's involvement, but the involvement of members of Congress who are now in Congress. So, things that it'll be harder for the Republicans to say, well, this is just in the past, we have to ignore it. These are people that are actually involved and will be up for re-election this fall. But let me just conclude with this. Even if successful, Democrats have a very high hill to climb this fall. We saw it again this week in San Francisco, where a progressive prosecutor who basically said, I'm not going to incarcerate very many people, and I'm going to let people out on bail with no cash bail, and I'm not going to prosecute minor crimes, got thrown out in a recall, and he got thrown out 60-40. And as important as the overall total was for the Democratic point of view, the strongest vote to throw him out came from the Asian community, which is the fastest growing part of the electorate and the part of the electorate the Democrats hope to have as part of their core electorate. So they've got a very difficult, with crime and inflation, they've got a very difficult political environment to run in this fall. And I don't really think these hearings are going to lower the price of gasoline or make neighborhoods safer. So barring a real bombshell, I don't think they'll dramatically affect the outcome of the election.
Craig, both you and Al are also students of media. It's my understanding that the committee has hired filmmakers and news producers to work on this production. I wonder if you see a danger of that something that is too well produced loses that authenticity that we obviously saw during the Watergate hearings.
I kind of think that story is a lot more interesting to insiders in Washington, D.C. The press is making a lot of it. I don't know that it has legs as the hearings roll on, unless there's some kind of a dramatically different style and approach. I think it's a wise communications decision to, think maybe a little bit anew about how to present this to the American people. I also think, and I'll come back to this Watergate comparison, I think the bar in some ways is higher than with Watergate. And by that, I mean, Nixon was a sitting president. The story was pretty much out there, and yes, there were bombshells and there were lots of facts to bring to the fore. But the question was, does Nixon, deserve to stay in office? And the answer to that was no, including by members of his own party. Today and tonight, I think the path they're on is not to just say, crimes were committed, and But this is a president who's now out of office. And what they're saying is, unless he's stopped, this is going to continue. And it's what's going to continue. That's the threat to the nation. And, it's like, you can argue that Bonnie and Clyde were robbing banks. There was no debate about that. The question is, how do you stop them from robbing more banks? And what they're trying to tell us, I think, tonight and through these hearings, is that there was a grave threat. The threat continues. And unless actions are taken, we run a very real risk of having democracy threatened once again. And that's a pretty high bar. And it will be something that the American people will have to, I think, come to grips with, if in fact the story as it's beginning to be told is as serious and as threatening as it seems it may be.
Al, going back to Watergate, one of the most significant pieces of evidence was Nixon telling John Dean on tape that anyone could find $1 million. That was one of the deal killers for many Republican leaders. Today, those Republican leaders would not be taking that response.
Nixon got hung by his own words, but Trump's words have been out there for a year and a half. And Kevin McCarthy's words have been out there for a year and a half, and Mitch McConnell's words. I mean, I think those words aren't going to be a surprise. I don't know what new evidence they have and how compelling it is. But the point that Craig made about Trump not being in office is a big difference. I mean, when you have a president in office and basically you've proven that he's a crook and undermining democracy and promoted petty break-ins. I mean, basically he's a criminal. And you're going to have to run with him as head of your party because he's a live politician. You're a lot more willing to go after him and to break with him. It's a different thing when he's gone. Now, will it? I mean, maybe the best impact and the most important impact would be that the committee can have would be to compete to. Raise the bar for Trump to run in 2024 as a way to prevent this from happening again. But, the interesting thing about Watergate, I'm thinking about this, Watergate was pretty subtle in a sense. I mean, Nixon's strategy in Watergate was first to derail Muskie's candidacy, so he had a weaker opponent. And nobody really knew he was doing it. We felt it. I felt it when I went out to Los Angeles to put on a property tax hearing in my subcommittee. And I found a leaked memo, and a memo was leaked to Evans and Novak, and to the lead political reporter for the LA Times, saying Muskie was abusing his subcommittee by doing property tax hearings. And it turned out that it was a memo that the pollster had said that property tax was a good issue, and the committee to reelect the president had we had a messenger who, because in those days you didn't have the internet and didn't have email, so you had to have a messenger to take material from the campaign office to the Senate office and back and forth, and the committee to reelect the president paid the cab driver who volunteered to be the messenger $1,000 a month to copy everything we did. Right. And that's how it all happened. But people didn't really understand that, and it was subtle. And even when it was going on, we didn't know exactly what was going on. Trump is overt about what he wants to do. And so again, it just, I think that it's going to be so hard to get beyond what people already know and what they already think. But I hope, if nothing else, it does make it harder and maybe even impossible for Trump to run in 2024, because if he runs in 2024, and he is really, really discredited by 70% of the electorate, a lot of the Republicans are not going to want to join with him.
That's all the time we have. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you very much indeed. We will see you next week.